A university professor took his two daughters for a walk one November morning. They were 10 and 12 years old. He knew the trail well. He'd walked it before. And then, one of the girls spotted something behind a boulder. Something that looked like a foot. What they found in that valley that morning would set off one of the most baffling, most disturbing unsolved mysteries in modern European history. A woman, burnt beyond recognition. No name, no origin, no trace of where she came from or why she was there. And the more investigators dug, the stranger and darker and more dangerous this case became. 50 years later, we still don't know who she was. This is the Cold Files, and today we open the case of the Isdal Woman. If you're new here, welcome to the Cold Files. We don't sensationalize, we don't speculate for clicks. What we do is sit with cases that the world moved on from, cases that were closed too fast, buried too quietly, or simply never solved. And we ask the question nobody else wanted to keep asking. What actually happened? Subscribe if that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, because it does the same to us. Now, let's go to Norway, 1970. Isdalen. In Norwegian, the Valley of Ice. But locals have another name for it, the Valley of Death. That name didn't come from nowhere. People have had accidents there for centuries. The terrain is treacherous. Boulders, frozen ground, switchback trails that disappear in the fog. But there's a darker layer to it. A rumor that stretches back to medieval times that this valley was used as a place where people came to end their lives. Remote, hidden, silent. It was the 29th of November 1970 when Professor Mygland and his two daughters walked into it. One of the girls noticed it first, something behind a boulder. Her father looked up and felt his stomach drop. Even from a distance, it looked like a foot, a human foot, sticking out from behind the rock. He moved toward it, shielded the children, and then the smell hit them. Burnt, heavy, wrong. There was a woman on the ground. Her entire front had been burnt, skin, clothing, gone. Her back completely untouched. Her body contorted into what pathologists call a boxer's pose, fists clenched, elbows bent, knees pulled in. It's what happens to a body when extreme heat causes the muscles to contract. It's not a position someone chooses. It's what fire does to a person. The professor didn't wait. He grabbed his daughters and they ran. By 9 a.m., Bergen police had received the call. A small team was dispatched, and they too noticed it before they even saw her, the smell of burnt flesh drifting through the cold morning air. She was around 5'3", slim, dark hair, small round face. She looked young, perhaps in her late 20s, but the fire had taken most of that. Around her body were scattered belongings, rubber boots, 2 plastic bottles partially melted, a scarf, an umbrella, a purse, a box of matches, scraps of burnt paper, and what appeared to be the charred remains of a passport holder. There was jewelry, a watch stopped at 10 past 10, and under her body, a fur hat. When tested, it would be found to contain traces of petrol. But here's the thing that immediately unsettled investigators. Every single label on her clothing had been cut off. Every label on her belongings removed or rubbed out. She had been stripped of every identifying marker. Not one of her possessions could tell them who she was. The autopsy came back. She had carbon monoxide in her system, burns inside her respiratory tract. The fire had played a role in her death, but that wasn't the whole story. Then, the toxicology report landed. She had somewhere between 50 and 70 barbiturate tablets in her system, A large number were undigested, and according to one source, some were still in her mouth when she died. The specific pill was the most common choice among women in Europe at the time who wanted to end their lives by overdose. And this particular brand, it wasn't sold in Norway. It was linked to England. So who was she? How did she die? Was this murder, or did she do this to herself? And if she came here to die, why burn herself? Where were the petrol canisters? Why travel to this specific remote valley in the dead of Norwegian winter? Bergen police had no answers. They went to the press. No one came forward. No one had reported a woman matching her description missing. 3 days later, they got their first real lead. A call came into Bergen train station. Someone had left 2 suitcases there on the 23rd of November, exactly 1 week before the body was found. They hadn't been collected. Staff were beginning to wonder. Police opened them. Inside, a pair of glasses with her fingerprint on the lens. Plain glass lenses, no prescription, decorative, a disguise. 2 wigs, fancy clothes, a bathrobe, a train map with stations between Oslo and Bergen handwritten at the top, a compass, Italian-made slippers, 500 German Deutschmarks, a sewing kit from a hotel in Geneva, a steel spoon with a heart engraved on the back, and inside that heart, the initials SCHP, traced back to an Austrian manufacturer. And just like the belongings at the scene, every label had been removed, every brand, every identifying marker, rubbed out or cut off. One item still had a label, a matchbook linked to an erotic underwear mail-order company in Germany. There was also a notebook, pages filled with what looked at first glance like a code, lines of numbers and letters. It would be sent to a military code breaker. But the breakthrough, the thing that started pulling the thread, was a shopping bag with a receipt inside. A shoe shop in Stavanger, south of Bergen. Police went to the shop, and the worker remembered her immediately. She came in on the 18th of November, spent a long time choosing boots. Good looking, he said. She spoke English, but with an accent he couldn't place. Not Scandinavian. Further south, he thought. Southern European, maybe. She smelled unusual, he noted. Like garlic. Something that would have been quite foreign in early 1970s Norway. When he went to the basement to fetch her size, she called after him in a language that wasn't English. He thought it might have been German or French. He wasn't certain. Hotels in Stavanger were contacted next. Sure enough, a hit. A woman had stayed at a hotel near the shoe shop for 9 days. Room 615, a single room without a bathroom. She checked out on the 18th of November and took a hydrofoil to Bergen. The bellboy remembered helping her with her bags. He asked where she was from. She said, Belgium. She wore heavy makeup, dark lips, dark eyes. Always serious. Rarely smiled. She spoke quietly, but she didn't seem shy. She seemed deliberate. When she checked in, she filled out a hotel registration card. Name, Fenella Lorch. Nationality, Belgian. Belgian authorities were contacted. No such woman existed. The passport number, fake. The military code breaker came back with an answer, but not the one anyone expected. It wasn't a code. It was a personal shorthand. Each line in the notebook represented a place and a date. She was keeping a log of her own movements, written in a way that only she could understand. All except the final line, which reads ML 23N MM. The 23rd of November, the day she left the suitcases at the station, the last day she was seen alive. ML and MM, unknown. Initials. A destination she never reached. Nobody knows. To this day. Stack after stack of hotel registration cards came back, all in the same handwriting, but all under different names, different birthplaces, all Belgian, written mostly in German, but a German that wasn't quite right, misspellings, words that didn't exist, as if German was a language she was wearing rather than speaking. 8 identities, possibly more. 8 fake passports. Experts in Soviet intelligence methods would later point this out as an oddity. A trained spy would carry 1, maybe 2 clean legends. 8 simultaneous false identities is not a spy technique. It's something else. Desperation, improvisation, or a very different kind of operation altogether. The final hotel she checked into before she died, the Hotel Hordeheimen, shows a change in handwriting. Experts confirmed it was the same hand, but deliberately altered. In the last hotel she ever stayed in, the Isdal Woman was hiding. The question is, from whom? At the Hotel Neptune in Bergen, a staff member in the restaurant saw her 2 evenings in a row. The first evening, she sat alone and looked sad. The second evening, she had company. An older man with gray hair. Norwegian, the worker believed. The two of them sat across from each other and said nothing. He was reading what looked like a sheet of paper. She sat watching him with a blank expression. No conversation, no warmth. It didn't feel like a date. It felt like a meeting. This gray-haired man never made it into the official police report. At the Hotel Rosenkrantz, a maid entered a room she thought was empty. Inside, the Isdal Woman lying in bed. And seated in a chair across the room, a young man, blonde hair, gray suit. Neither of them spoke as the maid quickly made the bed and left. They just watched her in complete silence until she walked out. That man also never made it into the official police report. Neither man ever came forward. A furniture shop in Bergen. A couple came in looking for a wall-hanging mirror. Both spoke a language the staff couldn't identify. Possibly German, possibly Eastern European. The woman matched the Isdal Woman's description almost perfectly. One detail was different. Curly, messy hair, which matched one of the wigs found in her suitcase. Why was she shopping for a mirror while staying in hotels? The mirror was never found. In her final hotel, the Hordeheimen, she asked that housekeeping not enter her room. The Do Not Disturb sign hung from the door almost constantly. When she did allow cleaning, staff noticed something unusual about her habits. When she was inside her room, she moved the armchair out into the hallway. When she went out, she brought it back in. She needed to see the door. She needed to know if anyone was behind it. On the 23rd of November, she checked out, took a taxi to the train station with her 2 suitcases, checked the bags in, and was never seen alive again. 1 week later, the professor and his daughters found her in the valley. 3 weeks. That's how long the investigation lasted before it was officially closed. The Bergen police declared it a tragic suicide. Case closed. Journalists who had been covering the story noticed something. Their usual contacts in the police force had gone silent, more tight-lipped than they'd ever been on any case before. One reporter was allowed to look at case files at the station and found a sealed envelope. It had the weight of a tape inside. On the outside it read, "To be opened only by the chief of the secret police." He didn't open it. He was afraid of losing his contacts. That envelope cannot be found today in any official record. Bergen police themselves were frustrated. They didn't believe it was suicide. They were being stopped from following leads that went abroad. They were being told to rely only on the limited information other countries chose to send them. officers who worked the case felt, in their own words, like their hands were tied. This wasn't a routine Bergen murder case. Norway's secret police, the PST, had gotten involved. That almost never happened in a local homicide. And then there's the fisherman. In a fishing port not far from Stavanger, a man had been working on his trawler when he spotted an unusually well-dressed woman walking along the docks. She stood out immediately. Wrong clothes for the environment, clearly not local. She walked up to a naval vessel that was docked there and began talking to one of the officers for an extended period of time. When the story went public, he was certain this was her. He called the police. What happened next is one of the strangest details in this entire case. The man was boarding a train to Stavanger just before Christmas. His family had plans to spend the holidays in London. On the platform, two men approached him. They claimed to be police, no uniforms, no ID shown. They took him aside for about 20 minutes. When he returned to his family, he said nothing. He didn't want to worry them over the holidays. After Christmas, back in Norway, he told them what had actually happened. The two men had given him a handgun and a knife and told him to keep them on him at all times while he was in London, in case he needed to protect himself. He didn't know who he was protecting himself from. He was left paranoid for a long time. So why was a naval vessel at that dock? It was there for testing on the Penguin missile system, a cutting-edge lightweight guided missile that could be mounted on small ships. This was advanced NATO technology, and it was something the Soviet Union desperately wanted to know about. Russian ships were regularly spotted near Norwegian test zones. Norwegian fjords were believed to be hiding Soviet submarines. And the Isdal Woman's movements. Between Bergen and Stavanger, they aligned almost perfectly with the dates of multiple Penguin missile tests. She had been spotted close to test sites on more than one occasion. So, Soviet spy. It's the obvious theory. And on the surface, it checks out. Multiple false identities, clandestine meetings with men, movements aligned with sensitive military tests, a disguised, careful woman operating alone in a NATO country. But the experts who study Soviet intelligence methods aren't convinced. A trained Cold War operative would have one identity, maybe two. They'd be clean, consistent, and above all, invisible. The Isdal Woman was none of those things. She remembered by almost every single person she encountered. She stood out. She smelled unusual. She was striking. A well-built Soviet intelligence operation would never run an asset this conspicuous. 8 identities, all simultaneously juggled. That's not tradecraft. It's something else. Some researchers suggest she may have been a courier, not a spy herself, but someone who moved information between operatives. The meetings with multiple men could support that. No deep cover needed if you're just passing material from hand to hand. Others have pointed to links with non-state organizations, including pro-Palestinian political movements that were active in Europe at the time. Some claim she may have been in Geneva around the same period as a banker known to fund Palestinian resistance groups. But that thread remains thin. A few have suggested a more grounded explanation, that the men, the matchbook from the erotic mail-order company, the constant movement between cities, point to a high-class escort. But she consistently stayed at Christian-run hotels with strict conduct rules. No alcohol, no guests. It doesn't fit. Modern forensic analysis has added pieces without completing the picture. Isotope testing on her remains suggests she grew up in Germany, then moved to somewhere near Belgium at a young age. DNA has been collected and stored. Carbon-14 testing of her teeth, done as part of a 2018 podcast investigation that actually got the case officially reopened, suggests she may have been closer to 45 when she died, not the late 20s she claimed on hotel cards. And in 2018, a man came forward who had been hiking near the valley 1 week before her body was found. he saw a woman, slightly overdressed for the terrain, and behind her, at a distance, two serious-looking men, walking, following. ML, MM, the last two entries in her notebook bracketing the date she disappeared. Could they be people? The two men on that mountain? And what happened after the hiker walked away? A white coffin was lowered into a Bergen graveyard 2 months after her body was found. The coffin was lined with zinc so it wouldn't decay if they ever needed to open it again. 16 Bergen police officers attended, 2 of their colleagues, and a Catholic priest who said prayers over a woman whose name no one at that graveside knew. No headstone was placed. None of those officers are alive today. They went to their own graves, never knowing whose funeral they attended that day. There is no satisfying resolution to this case. There may never be. The documents are incomplete. The leads went cold or were buried. The people who might have known her are gone. What we're left with is a woman who tried very hard to be nobody, and who, in trying to disappear completely, became one of the most enduring mysteries in European history. Her DNA remains stored, available for comparison if a relative ever comes forward. Maybe one day someone will. Maybe one day we'll finally know her name. Until then, this is the Cold Files, and this case remains open. If you made it this far, you already know if this channel is for you. Subscribe. There are more files to open. And drop your theory on the Isdal Woman in the comments, because after 50 years, someone out there might know something. Even one piece, even a fragment. We read every single one. See you in the next case.